Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I trust and hope that you are all well. Quick little rant here. For those that think that they can come on the Back to Ashes channel and make a request just for them, such as removing the rain sounds or thinking that I copyrighted an opening from another content creator, it makes me laugh. And while everyone knows me as a really, really good person, I tend to not feed into negative comments, but certain comments and certain people just need to be put in their place. And I am sorry if that comes off as me being an asshole, but things need to be said. The Back to Ashes channel is a sleep therapy channel. Instead of saying, hello, welcome back to Ashes, and then going into the good morning, good afternoon, or good evening is redundant with greeting people. So I had to get that rant out of my system. And for those of you that are listening to this that feel the need to leave comments and think that I'm going to make a change to the channel from your one request against the other 8,000 plus subs, it's just not going to happen. I bring the content that I see fit to this channel, and then I listen to the majority of the audience members if changes need to be made. Now, I do understand that sounds a little cocky, but that's just how it is. This channel was invented to help people sleep. So any rain ambiance, crackling fire, wind, or whatever ambient sound that I put in the background is for a reason. People need those sounds to go to sleep. From here on out, if there are any more hateful comments left in the comments section, you will simply be deleted or blocked. It says right so in the comment section. There are rules before you comment, and if you choose to ignore those and continue to spread your hate, well, the internet's a big place and you can find somewhere else to take that negativity, because it is not accepted here on Back to Ashes. Constructive criticism is. Hateful comments, not so much. With that being said, some new changes have been made. I do understand some people are having issues with the Buy Me a Coffee link. I will now be switching over to Patreon. Once everything is set up and ready, I will make another announcement in another video. And anyone that is interested, especially the members already, we will get everyone migrated over to Patreon, and things will be simpler. As most people do know that becoming a member or tipping on Buy Me a Coffee, of course, YouTube takes a percentage of that, and I don't get 100%. Whereas on Patreon, I get a lot more of the money or donations that the subscribers or random people send to me, in which I appreciate, because that money goes right back into these videos and the content that I bring to this platform. All right, I'm off my soapbox. It is time to go back to ashes. For when we arise from the ashes, we arise a bigger, brighter, stronger, and happier person in the morning. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and enjoy this dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Let's Not Meet Stories. Of course, right after this introduction, an ad will play. I'll read the first story, an ad will play, and there will be no more ads throughout the rest of this video. This is something that happened to me a couple years back that still freaks me out when I think about it. To start with, this was around midnight, and I was in my room browsing stuff on my phone, when I suddenly hear what sounds like knocking outside my bedroom window. Keep in mind, I'm on the ground level. I first shrugged it off as being a squirrel or something until I heard the same sounds again, which is when I started becoming concerned. It was at this point that I left my room and called my dad to tell him about what was happening. He tried to reassure me it was nothing, and while this was happening, I heard even more knocking coming from around the front door. I tried calling out to see if it was my big brother or anything, but didn't get any answers. At this point, I was starting to really freak out. It was after this that I heard someone at my back door trying to force the door open. It was locked, thankfully. And finally, after this, my dog finally caught on and started barking like crazy at the other end of the door, which finally drove whoever was out there off. After that happened, I called my grandpa, who lived a block over, to come and pick me up, because I was way too scared to be able to stay the night at that house. In retrospect, I should have called the police, but I wasn't thinking straight, and was shivering on the couch holding a kitchen knife the whole time I was waiting. I still have no idea who was out there that night. I had taken a walk alone in a nature trail earlier that day, and my only working theory is that someone had followed me home. I later learned that there were drifters living in the woods around that era, which adds to that. I have no evidence of that though. This was probably the scariest experience I've been through, and it still makes it hard for me to stay home alone at night. So, to whomever was trying to break into my home, I hope we never meet again. I've been having a super lousy few months, and this is kind of just the shit cherry on top. I was walking back from home yesterday to meet my spouse at home, where we have an apartment. It's getting darker earlier again, so it was close to full dark I was walking through. I'm always on edge when I walk alone, so I had my key lanyard in my hand already. I noticed right away when a guy came out from a side street and crossed the road to walk on my side. I was already at a brisk pace and was just a block and a half from home. As I passed under a streetlight, he called out to me. I ignored him. He called again. I ignored. He shouted, "What's your problem?" Without turning around or slowing, I just shouted, "Not interested," over my shoulder and started walking even faster. He then proceeded to yell, "Don't be such a bitch," and sounded angry, which is the point where I thought, F this. I'm not dealing with this. So I broke out into a sprint down the street toward my building. He shouted after me, and after a second, I heard his feet pounding on the sidewalk. I made it to the front door of my building, yanked the door open, and slammed it shut. I jammed my key into the locked lobby entrance, yanked it open, sped through, and slammed it shut. The front lobby walls are made of glass, and you can clearly see inside. I figured the locking door would deter him, but sped walked through the lobby and to the stairs anyway. A few male neighbors I'm acquainted with and friendly with were sitting in the lobby chatting, and I waved when they said hi to me. I guess I'm lucky they were there, because the locked door did not deter him. I hear a massive shattering smash, nearly shit my heart out, and my neighbor started yelling. I whip around and see that this butthole has either kicked or punched the locking door, shattering most of it, and is now trying to reach through and let himself in. I shouted to the neighbors, "He followed me here. I don't know him," and then booked it up the stairs and ran all the way to my apartment. I could still hear shouting when I got into my place, and I told my spouse right away what happened. We called 911. The cops came to our building, and one spoke briefly to me and my spouse. A search was conducted for the guy, who apparently ran away when he saw the several angry, yelling neighbors approaching him. We got a follow-up visit a couple hours later from a different cop. Turns out, the guy cut himself on the door, so it was easy to grab him once they found him. Apparently, this isn't his first time hanging around my complex, and he is known to the cops here as an addict who follows people around asking for money. He has been suspected of buying from dealers in our complex, but never caught. I guess I shouldn't even be surprised. It's not a good place, not a good building. Just something we can afford until we can move on to a better place. But for F's sake, I am so tired of living this way. Last year, I was going out for drinks with my friends, but since I had to go to uni the next day, I only stayed till around midnight. My boyfriend promised to pick me up and go home with me, because I don't like to take the subway alone at night. But since I was pretty drunk by then, I took a little too long walking out of the pub. Unfortunately, we had to wait for the night bus, with multiple stops, since the subway closes on weekdays at night. For context, my boyfriend and I don't live together, but very close to each other, around a 15 to 20 minute walking distance. Both areas are pretty shitty. He lives near a train station, many crackheads, homeless, and sketchy people around. And I live in cheap, bad district with a high crime rate, etc. My building has two entrances on two different streets, because it is a corner building leading to a patio and then to the apartment building and its doors. To get into my apartment, I have to open 3 doors. I usually use the entrance door that is nearer to the subway and on the side of my apartment. We had to take 2 buses to go home. One drove us to the train station and the next one from the train station to my apartment. After getting out of the first bus, we realized that we would have to wait for around 20 minutes or something for the second bus to come, and since I really had to sleep at home, class the next day, I didn't want to stay at his place. My boyfriend didn't want to wait, so he persuaded me to walk instead of taking the bus, which sober me would have never done. But since I was still drunk, I didn't care how we got home, so I agreed. We started to walk home and passed a few sketchy people, mostly people selling drugs and things like that, but nothing really bad. Then I saw a guy walking in our direction and I somehow got a bad feeling. So I told my boyfriend that I wanted to change to the other side of the street because I didn't want to walk past him. Suddenly, the guy yelled, "Hey," as if he wanted to ask us something, but we ignored it and continued to walk. He got louder and louder until he started to yell. I could see from the corner of my eye that he was coming over, so I whispered, "Run," to my boyfriend, took his hand and ran the fastest I could while he was chasing us. We ran and then made a turn to the right, the street where I live, and we hid. It seemed like he was gone, so I took my keys out and we started running towards my building, taking the other entrance of my building that I normally didn't use. As I was trying to open the door, my boyfriend started panicking, throwing me inside the patio and closing the door aggressively, and then pushing me to the building. He explained that the guy came running from the other side of the street, meaning he took a shortcut, probably thinking we were going to run to the subway or bus stops. If we had taken the other entrance, he would have been clearly the faster one. Being in shock, we unfortunately didn't call the police, which I regret. I stopped going out for drinks and clubbing for half a year after this, and slept at my boyfriend's place for 2 weeks. because I was scared that he would come back. I think the worst thing about this is that he really wanted to get us for whatever reason. I still want to know why he chased us for so long. 2 weeks later, a girl a few streets away was sexually assaulted in front of her building by a guy who chased her home. I wondered to this day if it was the same guy, or perhaps just a coincidence. So this only happened yesterday, and it's been driving me crazy. It's not as wild as other stories, but it's by far one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me. My husband and I are walking home from having a beer at the local pub at around 6 p.m. In terms of setting the scene, we live in a small New Zealand town, population 2,000. That's a real mixed bag in terms of residents. Older folk, meth heads, low income, but increasingly commuters from our capital city have been settling here. We fall into the latter category. It's spring here, so we still have plenty of light, and we're just chatting as we walk the 10 minutes or so home. About 3 minutes into the walk, at the first intersection on our walk, I spot a cat sitting on the fence of one of the corner houses on the other side of the street from us. I say, meow, and it meows back. It then starts stalking a bird, so my husband and I continue watching this house, the cat really, as we walk past. Suddenly, a person with a brown paper bag mask on their head kind of stumbles out of the front door of this house into the yard. Their mannerisms and how they're moving are so strange, but not what I'd associate with being drunk. The house itself seems completely dead, so there's no party on or anything. The person then turns to us and makes eye contact. Well, the eye holes in the mask were staring at us. And they slowly start backing away to the front door alcove of the house and disappear from view into the alcove. We've been slowly walking this whole time, and at this point, I have literal goosebumps and an intense sense of dread. When I write it down, it sounds so silly, but there was something so creepy about this person. We're still looking as we walk past the house, and the paper bag face slowly emerges from the alcove, watching us before disappearing from view again. As we walk and get further and further away, we keep turning around to look, and the same happens over and over again. Nothing, and then slowly but surely, the paper bag face emerges out to watch us. This continues until we were at the end of the street, some 350 meters away, and rounded the corner out of sight. It still makes my skin crawl thinking about it. My husband laughed and said it was probably some kid getting ready for Halloween or messing with us, and he's probably right. But I had to keep turning around to watch my back the rest of the walk home because I was so freaking creeped out. This happened Sunday night. I got into a huge fight with my mom, and it was very emotional and intense to say the least. We made up, said goodnight to each other, blah blah blah. But I was still pissed off. So my impulsive self decided I was going to take off for the night. I just wanted to cool off. I went into my backyard and hopped over one of our walls and started to walk around. Mind you, it was midnight and I'm a teenage girl that is on the skinny side walking around in a not so lit area. I didn't even have a phone in case something happened or a weapon for self-protection. For a bit of a layout in my story, down the street from my house, which is a neighborhood road, there is a church and a preschool across from it. In front of the preschool, there are large, tall hedges that sort of hide the pickup and drop-off that's in front of the school. There's a stop sign on the church's corner before the busy main road and a street lamp on the same corner. I made my way down to the corner on the church's side. I was very bored and cold, but it's not like I could call a friend to pick me up or hang out for the night. I decided to face the main road and put a hitchhiker's thumb up in hopes of someone pulling into the street and letting me use their phone to call a friend. After what felt like forever, I was getting no luck, and then I saw a guy from across the main road, and I called for him. I didn't have any weird feelings about him. He was harmless and he let me use his phone, but I still wasn't able to find any of my friends to come and get me. Before he left, he asked if I had a knife on me or something. I said, honestly, I forgot mine at home. He handed me a small but very sharp switchblade and told me to keep it, to stay safe, and to have a good night. After watching him walk into the dark heading east, I wandered up and down the sidewalk as cars passed by often. I started to pass the hedges, and I glanced over to the left of me where the school was. I saw a large silhouette of a man slowly creeping around in front of the doors of the small preschool. He was tall and looked like he was strong, broad shoulders too. It took me 0.2 seconds to realize he stopped and saw me, too. I went into flight mode and immediately noped the hell out of there and ran across the busy street because it was empty at that moment. I kept sprinting until I made my way home. I eventually crossed the street and was facing the main road, walking down to the church and take a left to get home. It was silent and no cars had gone by for a few minutes at that point. Then I heard a car speeding down the road, and I turned my head back to see it was a large white Suburban. I dismissed it, thinking nothing of it, as it turned right a few streets down across the road. I started to turn the corner under the street lamp when I looked back up again and saw it was starting to come out of the same road it just turned into. I'm not sure why or how my gut was telling me to run, but I did. I ran into the parking lot of the church and started to see headlights turn into the street. I threw myself onto the ground behind a ramp wall that was barely tall enough to hide me. Next thing I know, I'm about to cry because of how freaked out I was, while trying to stay silent at the same time, because the Suburban's headlight reflected off the walls of the building as it pulled into the parking lot. It made a few laps from what I could sneak a peek of and stopped in the middle for a couple minutes before it turned out and drove into the main road. I waited it out a bit longer and pulled the knife out, listening for anything and everything. Once I realized I was probably in the clear, I ran back home. Not sure what was going on, but to whoever they were, I hope we never meet again. For some context, I'm a 32-year-old female. This happened to me when I was about 25 or 26. I work full-time as a researcher at a university, which is where these encounters took place. I'm not a professor or anything, and because of my age at the time, I could have easily been mistaken for just another student wandering around campus. On some days, when the weather was nice, I would prefer to spend my lunch hour strolling around the university grounds outside, or sitting underneath a shady tree on a bench, enjoying the time I was not sitting in a cramped corner of a lab. On one of these days, I was sitting on a bench enjoying the fresh air, and a male student walking by asked if he could sit next to me. I'm a pretty shy and awkward kind of person, so even though I really would have preferred sitting alone, I said, sure. He initiated simple conversation, to which I obliged, but being careful not to be too forthcoming. He mentioned he had seen which departmental building I came and went from, which slightly alarmed me, given I had never seen this person before in my life. But I pushed the thought from my mind. After all, the weather had been decent lately, and I had spent nearly all my lunch hours for the past week outside. He asked if I was studying within the mentioned department, to which I told him that I was not a student, but rather I worked there. He told me he was an engineering student, and then followed up with asking me out to coffee sometime. I apologized and told him that I had a boyfriend and would have to decline. We parted ways after that, and I assumed I probably wouldn't see him around again. About a week or two went by, and I was spending another lunch hour outside on campus, sitting on a different bench somewhere. Seemingly out of nowhere, the same man from before asked if he could sit next to me again. Admittedly, I don't remember what he started talking to me about at first. My mind was reeling, and I was rather uncomfortable having to potentially turn this guy down a second time. Sure enough, he asked me again if we could go out for coffee sometime. I apologized and reminded him that I had a boyfriend and would not be meeting him for coffee. And again, he left after that. I was feeling rather anxious now, but it still hadn't reached a level where I felt I had to be too concerned. A few days later, I had finished work and was leaving the building to walk to where I had parked my car. The university charges a fortune for parking passes, even if you're employed by them. So I had always opted for free street parking about a 10-minute walk away from campus. My walking route would take me down several quiet residential streets with minimal car traffic. Even pedestrian traffic was pretty sparse on the busiest of days. It wasn't until I was about halfway to my car, down one of these quiet back streets, that I noticed someone walking directly across the street from me, but keeping a few paces behind. I noticed him from my peripheral vision and didn't want to flat out turn around to stare at him. It wasn't uncommon to see someone else by any means. I was just always trying to be aware of my surroundings when walking the streets alone. I had to make a few turns coming up anyways, and the chance that they would be going the same way as me was slim. But he did. He made all the turns I did, still walking on the sidewalk across from me, a few steps behind. I still did not want to look at whoever this was. I didn't want him to know that I was aware of what I thought he was doing. I quickened my pace to a speedy walk. I was approaching the first of two busier streets before I would reach my car. His pace quickened to keep up with me. That was the moment I panicked. The moment I was sure that he was indeed following me. After that, I started to full-out jog to cross the first of the busier streets. He ran to keep up behind me and was now on the same side of the street I was. I was now nearly at my car. I had to cross the last busy street and get about 100 meters and I would be there. But it was crossing the street that worried me. I often had to stop and wait a good minute or so before it was clear enough to do so. If this were the case, he would catch up with me. As if the stars aligned, as soon as I made it running to the busy street, I had a gap to cross. I booked it as fast as I could, finally turning around, once I had made it, to look and yell at the man who had been pursuing me. It was him. I could have suspected, but now it was confirmed. It was the engineering student whom I had turned down for coffee. "Stop following me," I yelled at him from across the busy street. "Can I just talk to you?" he yelled back. I didn't even answer him. I mean, the answer should have been obvious from the start, and I was certainly never going to give my time to anyone who had just followed and then chased me for about 1 kilometer. I keep moving quickly to my car, so determined to get the hell out of there that I didn't even care if he saw which car was mine. He had given up following me and never tried to cross the road too, to my relief. I got home and broke down. I mean, worse things had happened to other people, no doubt, and I was not harmed, fortunately. But I was shook. I had some anxieties walking to and from work after that. It wasn't long before a coworker and I would walk most of the distance back to our cars together after work. I even changed where I started parking for a time. A few weeks had passed since the incident, and I had not seen him around campus at all. I had started spending my lunches in the lab instead of outside, but occasionally I would go to the student center to buy lunch instead. This one particular day, the food court in the student center was packed, almost shoulder to shoulder. I was standing in line at a burger stall, and I heard a guy try and get someone's attention through the crowd. I look up and it's him again, waving to me and trying to make his way through the people. I panicked, and even though I'm terribly shy, I started a scene and yelled to him to leave me the F alone. His face dropped instantly as people stared at us, and he slinked back into the sea of students. My heart was pounding and I was shaking. I don't even remember if I ended up getting food after that. I went back to work, and from then on, was even more focused on my surroundings than I ever was before. It's been 5 or 6 years since then now, and I still work at the university. I am so relieved to say I never saw him again after the food court, and haven't had any other harrowing accounts on campus. I am still diligent about being aware of my surroundings, especially when I have to walk to and from campus alone. I never asked the guy his name, so I couldn't even report an incident to campus police or anything. All in all, I'm just glad I never saw him again, and I can only hope he never did this to any other girl before me or after me. I live in a medium-sized apartment building in a fairly major city. While the neighborhood I live in is more on the safe side, gun violence is very high in my city as a whole, and we have a big trafficking problem. Despite this, I feel pretty safe going out, especially close to my apartment building where it is mostly well lit. And I am friendly with a few of the regular homeless people. Last night, I got a reminder that my safety isn't guaranteed, and I have been pretty shaken since then. Last night at around 12:20 a.m., I asked my partner if he wanted to share a joint with me, and when he declined, I locked the apartment and went downstairs by myself. The exit I take spits me out onto the main street where there is still the occasional car driving by at this time. Usually, This type of human presence comforts me walking late at night. But tonight, a lone black and dark blue van approached in my peripheral and started to drive slowly, matching my walking pace until I rounded the corner and the van was stopped by a stoplight. I found it very strange at the time, but the van was on the other side of the street and there were 1 to 2 other cars, so I brushed it off. Around the corner, there is a little food truck area with a bunch of picnic tables. They have like Christmas string lights hung up and a few other ambient lights that are kept on the whole night, but it barely illuminates the area. As I'm walking past the picnic tables, I notice a large man dressed in dark clothes sitting alone at one of the back tables. He was wearing a hood or hat, so I couldn't see his whole face, but his eyes followed me as I walked the border of the picnic table. My usual smoke spot is behind a fence on the other side of the picnic area. I was a little shaken by spotting that man, and also didn't want to upset him by smoking near him. So I chose a slightly further spot against the side of a construction vehicle. I lit my joint and started puffing away and reading something on my phone. I soon start getting this really uneasy sensation. It felt like all my hairs were standing up and I got the most intense goosebumps I've ever felt. My phone was still playing music, and as I turned it off, I heard the shifting and rustling of gravel on the ground behind me. I swung my head around and saw a man reaching towards me with huge hands. I only caught a glimpse of his face before I fell to the ground. His eyes were wide, bulging, and extremely dark. They freaking terrified me. His mouth was agape and he was basically snarling at me. He scared me so bad I fell to the ground, stumbled, and broke into a run, all in like a second. I ran for a few seconds before I peeked behind my shoulder and saw him a couple yards behind me. At this point, I saw it was definitely the man who was sitting at the picnic table, and I now saw he was wearing what looked like a dirty bucket hat or fishing hat. He had shoulder-length, dirty, light-colored hair and was way taller than me, so at least 6 foot. He was definitely gaining on me, as I had lost ground by turning around, and I'm not in the best of shape to begin with. I was about to reach the first entrance to the building, but the issue was, 1, there were double doors at this entrance that closed quite slowly, and 2, the only way up was an elevator, so if he got inside with me, I was just shut out of luck. I kept running, taking my chances with my running ability versus quickly opening doors ability. I kept running along the other side of the building to get to the second entrance of the building. This one is just 2 single doors which open to the stairwell up to my apartment. It's above the 2nd floor, that's all I'll say because I'm still scared. As I'm nearing the entrance, I see another man who appears to be speed walking directly towards me from the opposite direction. I should note that throughout this, I've been hearing the growling and snarling of the first guy behind me, and as the second man gets closer, I hear he is also growling. I reach the keypad, unlock the first door, and quickly slam it closed behind me, until I hear the lock click again. The second man reached the door first, and I saw his face more clearly as it slammed against the glass window of the door. He was also tall with longer hair, and I remember he was wearing overalls, but I mostly remember his wild eyes and his teeth as he gnashed at me right before I turned away, opened the second door, and booked it up the stairs. I didn't even stop until I was in my apartment, had all the doors locked, and was under the covers. I think in retrospect, I didn't hear any sign of them following me up the stairs, but I was so convinced they were still on my tail. I think the only reason I got away from them was that they didn't know about this side entrance to my building. So, they didn't expect me to keep running past the first entrance. I got up to get my inhaler. I was having a near asthma attack at this point, and peeked out the window. My heart sank. I saw the same van that had creeped me out earlier parked across the street from the entrance to my building. The entrance is like right below my apartment window. I then looked down to see 3 men pacing along the side of the building, including the 2 that had chased me. I ducked down, fearing they would see me. A few minutes later, they start shining flashlights into the windows of apartments. At first, I think of course it's only my apartment, but after a while, it's clear they're just searching for me. At this point, I tried to call my building manager to let him know about the situation, and he sent out a text alert to our all building list. I was so paranoid another innocent person would be accosted by them, so I called the police. They told me they were on their way and to stay out of the window in case they were armed. A few minutes later, the men are spooked by a faraway police siren and get in the van and peeled away. I think it was from a different 911 call though, because when the officer arrived to our building, the siren wasn't on. I spent a long sleepless night thinking they'd come back, but they never did. Definitely going to avoid being alone at night from now on. I asked one of the homeless guys I am friendly with if he saw anything suspicious last night, but he said he hadn't. They couldn't have been residents because they didn't leave after management sent that alert to us. The part that sticks with me the most is the growling and intense look in both their eyes. I don't know if they were on drugs or what. They never said any words to me or each other. I haven't heard any updates from the cops, but it's only been a few hours, and they didn't seem that interested in my statement, as the van had disappeared when they left. To the 2 men who growled at me and chased me into my apartment, I hope I never run into you again. A few years ago, I was working at a pizza chain in my hometown as a driver. I was 27, but made damn good money delivering. I had worked at a few other places, both local and chain, in the years before, and still work as a dasher on occasion, even after this happened. Now, I choose to deliver in much safer areas for this reason. I got luckier than I could have ever imagined. One night I was working and had a double, meaning 2 deliveries, to take. Both were cash orders. I had $12 left in my bank. What drivers are given to use as change for cash orders so you don't have a ton of cash on you at all times. The first order went smoothly. The guy gave me $50 for a $35 order, so I was excited about the nice tip. I drove to the second delivery. It was at an apartment complex with multiple buildings. I had delivered there before. The sun was about to set, but it was still very light out. The chain I worked at had us drive company cars with the logo on it, all white sedans. This is important. I grab the order and go to the door to the apartment building. A young guy comes out, and a much bigger, older guy was outside smoking a cigarette. The big guy went inside as the smaller guy came out. He looked around nervously and asked how much he owed me. The way he was looking around just made me very nervous. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I told him the amount and he said that wasn't what he was told on the phone. Something was very wrong. I felt someone else walk out behind me from the door. As the first young guy looked around down the parking lot, craning his neck as if he was looking for someone. I told him the amount again and broke down the order for him, trying to keep calm. Then, the first guy held a gun to my right temple. I also felt a poke on my spine. 2 gunmen. I couldn't speak. Words wouldn't form, no matter how hard I tried. "Give me your money and keys now," the first guy growled, and I fumbled immediately for the keys. I gave him my bank, but hadn't realized the 50 was mixed in. I gave him the keys, trying my best to remain calm. Another guy came up from the left. He had poofy hair and was around the same age as the first kid. The one behind me I hadn't seen yet. The big-haired kid grabbed the pizza bag and ran off and hid. The first kid searched the company car. Luckily, I had left my wallet in my personal car. I saw him grab my cell phone. That's when the panic began to set in. I had pictures on that phone that I hadn't backed up of my then 5-year-old son, who absolutely is my world. "Please, please don't take that. I have pictures of my son who died on there. It's all I have of him, please," I lied. My son is very much alive. The kid behind me spoke softly. "Trust me, just listen to him. You'll get it back, undamaged. I don't want to be here either." I could tell he'd been crying by how his voice sounded. A car began pulling in and the 3 boys took off to the other end of the complex in a full sprint. Before the one behind me ran, he dropped the gun in front of me. Standard issue 9mm, silver and black, safety off. Looked completely real to me. He picked it back up and ran with the others. The guy that pulled in saw me. It was a woman and her kid. Panic set in as I realized they could easily come back and do way worse to me. As the sky started to get dark, I collapsed. They had taken my company car keys, $72, the pizza, and my phone. The woman ran up to me and asked if I was all right. She took me into her apartment in the next building over and locked the door. I was shaking so hard I couldn't even hold her phone to talk to 911 as she set down her kid. Her boyfriend, I assume, helped me call. I spoke to the operator and told her everything. I'm colorblind and these guys were obviously wearing all black and white clothes, thank God. I had a full description of 2 of them. The poor woman who helped me was going to be late for work, but she still stayed until I was off the phone and cops had shown up. Man, she was harsh and blunt with the operator, but I will never forget this woman's utter kindness to me and her boyfriends. Cops showed up and contacted my store and my manager, brought the spare keys for me to drive the car back to the store. After dealing with the cops, I drove back and was greeted by crying and beyond worried coworkers. All of them were terrified that I was hurt. It meant a lot to me how much they cared, but I told them I was fine. I filed the proper paperwork, and the 72 was written off as a loss to the store. Thank God, because I had worked other stores that make you pay back the money out of pocket if you get robbed to prevent drivers from stealing. I was told by the owner to take the rest of the night off and take care of myself. He gave me a hug. He was, to this day, one of the best bosses I've ever had. What I didn't know was, I was in for a very long night. I called my best friend before I left the store from the store phone and asked where he was. We usually meet up after work for drinks. He was around the corner at a bar, so I met up with him. His dad was a District 4 cop in my city at the time, the same district that this happened in. He told me his dad had given him a heads up and he had 2 shots waiting for me to calm my nerves. After the 2 shots, we began playing pool when his dad called his phone and asked if I was with him yet. He said yeah and handed me the phone. His dad asked if I could come to the station. I was honest and told him I'd had 2 shots, so he sent out a squad car to get me since I wasn't that far away. We went to the station. They had suspects in custody. I was needed to ID them. 3 boys and a driver. They had been caught less than 20 minutes after the robbery for speeding. The bolo had already gone out and they matched the description. They had used the money to buy weed and gas and had taken off. They had at least 15 stolen cell phones on them. The order had been placed on a stolen phone. My phone was in the mix in the box. The police told me to grab my phone only, and I did. They asked me to unlock it. It had fingerprint verification, so that was easy. 9 of the 10 tries to unlock it had already been used before my phone would be completely reset. It unlocked. I told the police every detail yet again. Although my parental instincts kicked in, I told them the guy behind me quite obviously was bullied into this and to show mercy. He was the one with the white shirt. The police went wide-eyed and told me he was the one talking. The other 3 denied involvement. That's when I found out about the 4th guy, the driver. We found out later he was completely unaware of the robbery and was just picking up his friends. He was never charged. The boy who was behind me and the one who grabbed the pizza were 15 and 16 and got 6 months of house arrest. The only reason the one behind me got off easy, despite having the gun to my back, was because I asked him to go easy on him, that he was a good kid who didn't want to be there. And he was the only one confessing. Makes sense since he had even said the other guy wouldn't have the phone for long. He was planning on going to the cops had they not been caught. But the other guy, the first kid who put the gun to my temple, it was his 18th birthday. He got the book thrown at him. In the courtroom, he made fun of me and was laughing at me. Seeing him made me panic. The judge scolded him for his behavior, and he just grinned and glared at me with a Joker-like grin. All I could see was pure evil. This kid will commit more crimes. I have no doubt he will eventually end someone's life. You can see how cold he is just by looking into his eyes. He's evil incarnate. I grew up in a town full of murderers and abusers. I had never seen this kind of evil in my life, and I never want to see it again. I asked to have my name stricken from the records and asked to remain anonymous in case he ever got out. I'm so glad I did. Because today, I got a letter from the state. He's being released in February. The court only had my old address, my parents' house, and my mom didn't think the letter was important. I missed the deadline to protest his release for probation. The plea deal was 8 years. It's only been 4. He's getting out early due to overcrowding. Not good behavior. Overcrowding. This coming February. And I'm ready if he finds me. My wife, my parents, everyone I know knows his face and name. If he tries anything, we all are ready. But for his sake, I hope we never meet again. To the woman and her family who helped me. I was a woman then. I am trans. If you see this, please know my undying gratitude for you all. It was inconvenient for you, and yet you still were late to work to help me, and I cannot thank you enough. I bought Christmas presents for your daughter, but when I went to the landlord there to find you, you had moved. I didn't want to be a creep and stalk your new place, but I'm glad you got out of that bad neighborhood, and I hope your beautiful baby girl is doing well too. I would gladly meet you again to give you the proper thanks you deserve. From the Domino's driver in Southwest Ohio. This happened to me a few years back. I was living on my own in the city and was unemployed at the time, usually out looking for work and trying to stay busy. One early afternoon, I was heading back to my neighborhood after running some errands downtown and boarded a tram that would take me almost all the way home. There was a park that I would have to cross between the stop and my home, but crossing it would only take a few minutes. So I board the tram, which was most likely empty. Besides me, there was one younger man in the second carriage, and the driver up front in the first. I find an empty two-seater. The rows are quite narrow, but I'm comfortable. I put my earbuds in and look out the window as we start moving out of downtown and towards home. We pass a couple of stops and don't pick up any new passengers. There had probably been a tram right in front of us who took all the people, so it was particularly empty compared to normal. At the third stop, the doors behind me open, but I don't pay much attention until a stocky man, average height, probably in his 50s, with a neat, short hair and inconspicuous clothes, suddenly sits down on the seat next to me. Now this is very strange. We're in a country where social conventions dictate that you do not sit next to someone on public transport unless there are no other options left. And given that the rows are very narrow, this guy is basically trapping me. I can't get past him without his cooperation. He greets me with a huge smile and says, "Hi," as he sits down. Oh no. As women, we know the risks of rejecting men and are conditioned to be pleasant for society and for our own safety. But on this particular day, being down about not finding work and it being broad daylight, I decide I do not want to play along. I just want to listen to my music, and I don't like this man's vibe. I tell him I'm not in the mood to talk and he needs to go sit elsewhere. Wrong answer. The man goes from 0 to 100 in 0.2 seconds, and his face contorts with rage as he starts yelling at me from the top of his lungs. I wish this was an exaggeration, but unfortunately it isn't. He was loud AF. "You are a terrible person. You don't clean yourself. You stink of sweat." I didn't. He did. He goes on and on about what an abomination of a person I am, and I have sort of a freeze reaction. Inside, I'm getting very, very scared. I start looking for a way out, but I'm trapped. I look over to the young man, hoping he will come to my rescue. I can tell he's hoping to stay out of it, but after I've been screamed at for maybe 2 whole minutes, he finally says meekly, "You better calm down." Which of course doesn't help, so he just gives up and goes back to whatever he was doing, probably looking at his phone. I'm hoping that the driver might react, as he has a clear view to the back of the tram and there's no way he's not hearing what's going on. But again, nothing. The stocky man, maybe frustrated that I'm not reacting to his insults, escalates the abuse and starts screaming that he's going to kill me. At this point, I have to do something and unconsciously probably decide that the only way is through. I'm so done with this situation. So before I even realize what I'm doing, I just get up and push past him. It's all survival instinct. Scared that he's going to follow me, I move quickly towards the front of the tram. He gets up and follows me, all red-faced, shouting how he knows where I live and that I need to clean myself behind my ears, that I stink and that he's going to effing kill me. Again, the driver does nothing. As we pull up to the next stop, which is the stop before mine, I wait until the very last minute before I ask the driver to let me out the front door, which he does. I slip out quickly in hopes of escaping without being followed. I don't dare take the time to look over my shoulder. I just hurry down the steps and away from the stop. I am so scared. Only when the tram has left the station do I take a second to look around me, and he's not there. A brief sense of relief washes over me before I start worrying that he's going to get off at the next stop, which is probably my stop, and that he will be waiting for me there. It should come as to no surprise that I do not want this guy to follow me through the park or know where I live. So I'll spend a good hour just walking around, trying to get my nervous system out of panic mode and staying close to shops where there are other people around, before finally I make my way home. So, the one time I put my own comfort and needs before those of a stranger and didn't reject him in a pleasant and non-confrontational manner, I learned that this is like playing Russian roulette. I got the bullet. And I learned that you cannot count on the kindness of strangers. In the company of cowards, you are on your own. Insane man, cowardly bystander, and tram driver, I hope I never meet all three of you again. One time I was walking home from the train station after I spent the weekend at my aunt's house. It was about 11 p.m. at night and very dark outside. When I was almost home, I noticed a guy on crutches in front of me, who walked the same direction and then stopped every couple meters to turn around and look at me before continuing to walk on. Since he was walking with a limp, I quickly passed him. When I did, he stopped walking and grinned at me in a very creepy way. I kept moving. Since I lived in an apartment over a burger restaurant, for a moment I considered to ask one of the employees to walk me to the front door, because to get to the entrance of the apartment part of the house, you had to walk around the house into a dark court. Finally, I, however, didn't ask, because I thought, what could possibly happen? The guy is on crutches and I didn't want to come across childish. So I was walking through the court of our house and wanted to pull out my keys while walking. Suddenly, I couldn't find them in my handbag. I realized I had thrown them somewhere in my travel bag because I didn't want to lose them from my handbag while staying at my aunt's and being out with her all the time. So, still standing in the middle of the court, I had to search the whole travel bag for that damn key. I was so distracted by the whole key searching incident that I totally forgot about the creepy guy I had encountered before. When I finally pulled the key out of the bag, I looked up and the creepy guy from before was standing right on my front door, grinning at me. I always thought in a situation like that I'd start screaming, but instead, I couldn't get myself to make any sound at all. With the keys in my hand, I started running to the front door. I opened it, pushed him aside, and jumped inside the house. The guy, still walking with a limp, followed me as fast as he could. Luckily, due to his injury, he wasn't as fast as me. Unfortunately for me, our front door was one of those doors that slowly fall into the lock automatically. But when you try to push them in order to shut them quicker, it pressures back and stops you from slamming it. So, there I was, trying to push the door into the lock, while Creepy Guy was on his way to follow me into the house. Believe it or not, the door fell into the lock right in the second he reached the doorstep. Through the glass door, we just looked at each other, both breathing heavily from the race. He looked quite disappointed. I quickly ran upstairs to my apartment and locked myself in it. Later that night, I looked outside my window and I saw that same man walking up and down the road in front of my house. He stayed there for about 3 to 4 hours after the incident. I can't tell you what it was that made me not call the cops. I guess I was like, after all, nothing happened. What can they do about it? After that, I didn't feel safe in my home anymore because I knew that he knew where I lived. I only left my apartment when being picked up or dropped off and made sure to be home before it was turning dark every day for 2 weeks. Finally, I decided to go to the police and tell them about it, to ask whether they can keep a special eye on the neighborhood for a bit. I went to the police station and it happened exactly what I feared. They took notes and said, we can't really do anything about it now. You should have called before, but we'll make a note. A couple days passed and suddenly I get a call back from another police officer who asks me a lot about what happened. He then tells me that they've been looking for the guy on crutches for months already because he molested several girls in our town, followed them into their apartments, and even slept in front of their doors. He had been in police custody before, got out, and violated probation. He had some kind of mental illness too. The police officer told me to immediately call in case the guy shows up again. He luckily never did. It was only then that I understood the seriousness of the situation and realized that I most likely escaped an attempted assault in some sort of way by just an inch. I, in a way, really didn't believe myself that the whole thing had actually happened before the police guy called me back. This was 5 years ago, but I still think about it from time to time and it still gives me creeps. Hey, creepy guy, let's never meet again. All right, this happened to me about 3 years ago. It was brought up recently with my friends and they suggested that I write about it. I've gone through therapy for this and trained in firearms because this was the creepiest night of my life. I spent a night in what felt like a horror movie, and it's still so vivid. It was a Wednesday night in the summer. I was off work. My husband was out of town, and our son was staying at his grandma's for the night. I was home alone with my dogs, an 80-pound Aussie mix, and my 80-pound German Shepherd mixed with Pit Bull. I always have issues sleeping when I'm home alone, so I tend to just binge TV in the living room until I can't keep my eyes open anymore. This particular night, I remembered that the trash pickup comes the next day. I decided to turn on Game of Thrones for a bit. Then I would take the trash out. All of a sudden, I realize it's 1:30 a.m. and I still haven't taken the trash to the curb. My house has 2 solid iron gates, one in the front and one to the side door/backyard. Lighting on our street or anywhere in our neighborhood isn't that great, but it's a quiet neighborhood with a lot of families and you rarely hear about crime here. I looked out the window by habit before I took the trash out and saw who I thought was my neighbor smoking a cigarette outside of his gate across the street, looking directly at me. For context, this is a normal occurrence. My neighbor across the street hides smoking cigarettes from his wife, so he typically does it late at night in front of his gate. I get off work late, so I usually see him and we wave and say hi, chat a little, then I go inside and he makes the joke, "You didn't see me smoking if my wife asks." So, unbothered by seeing the guy, I go outside, grab my trash cans, open my squeaky iron gate, and take them out to the curb. I did not have my glasses on at the time, so as usual I waved and said hello. However, the guy, who I thought was my neighbor, threw down the cigarette and quickly walked off down the street. It took me a minute to register that he was not my neighbor. I was a little creeped out because he was clearly staring into my window from the opposite sidewalk. But also, maybe it was the guy taking a night walk, not unusual in our neighborhood, and just stopped for a cigarette. I thought I probably weirded him out as much as he weirded me out. Went back inside and laid on the couch with my dogs to keep watching Game of Thrones. At some point, I fell asleep, and I woke up hearing my gate squeak, and my German Shepherd mix was growling. He's extremely protective of our family at home, but he's also the kind of dog you can take anywhere because he's so friendly in public. My Aussie mix is more passive, but his sheer size and scary bark tends to deter people. He's very friendly though. I quickly got up and pulled back my curtain. My gate was still shut, but I didn't see anything. My dog, however, continued to growl at my front door. I look out another window, which had a better view of my front yard and porch. I didn't see anything. Eventually, my dog settled back down with my other dog, but I was still uneasy. I ended up watching TV again because I couldn't go back to sleep. An hour later, I definitely heard my gate squeak. We are the only ones with a heavy cast iron gate, and the noise it makes is so distinct. So I look out the curtain, while my dogs are continuing to softly growl. My gate is halfway open, but I don't see anyone. At this point, I'm panicking. In my panic, I couldn't find my phone. I grabbed my wooden baseball bat out of our room, crouched down, and started going through the couch cushions to get my phone. My dogs are oddly still, quietly growling instead of barking, so I assumed no one was there. The minute I find my phone, my front door handle starts shaking. I run to the side door to let my German Shepherd mix out. I know he'll protect me, and he can jump the 6 feet back gate. My Aussie mix, going crazy, busts out one of our door side lights. I heard the guy say, "Oh shit!" and immediately I let out my GSD mix. I jumped up to look out the window, saw my dog latch on the guy's hand. The guy starts screaming and takes off down the street, my dog chasing him. I then become terrified he'll hurt my dog. so I'll run out with my baseball bat, screaming my dog's name over and over. The next thing I know, my dog is prancing down the street back to me, happy as shit with blood all over his face. I called the police. They took another hour or so to show up and didn't seem to take me too seriously. They said they'd call local hospitals, but I never heard back. I called my husband bawling and he got on the next flight home. I stayed at his mom's for a few days, too terrified to go home. I did buy my dogs giant ribeyes for being so good and saving me. I don't know what that guy wanted, but since then, I've been trained in firearms and self-defense. So, creepy guy, let's not meet because my dog might finish the job he started. I went on a Tinder date some time ago while I was adjusting to a new city I had moved to. I didn't really know anybody there, so I used some online dating apps to see the dating scene around town. I landed one from a girl that seemed just like an artsy hippie type of girl. We had a few exchanges through the Tinder app and then decided to meet up for a drink. I picked her up at her house and she greeted me at the door and gave me a hug. She said the name of a local bar she wanted to go to for us to chat and get to know each other. I told her I could drive and proceeded to my car. The first red flag I noticed was when I walked to my car and opened the door. She had just followed me to the driver's side and was standing behind me staring. I looked at her blankly for about 15 seconds and asked her if she was going to get in. She said, "Sure, I would love to," and went the long way to the passenger side around the back of the car. Since I had just met the girl, I figured she had just maybe smoked some weed or something, as I had kind of got the vibe she was a bit of a stoner. As I was driving to the bar, she talked in a very low voice, almost as if she was trying to whisper. I am not hard of hearing or anything, but I had to ask her to repeat herself several times, just so I could make out the full sentences she was saying. When we got to the bar, I made sure we got a seat closer to the back away from most people, just so I could have a little quiet in order to hear her. The conversations honestly carried on as normal from this point, and it was actually a fun time for the time being. We talked about different things we were interested in, and she did bring up she did recreationally use weed and a few other tripping substances like shrooms and such. I am not much of a fan of these, but it at least made me relax in the back of my mind to think maybe she was just high off marijuana, and that rationally explains some of the out there behavior. Granted, I had a few drinks at this point, so I honestly wasn't thinking very straight. I asked her if she wanted to go to my place after drinks, and she agreed. When we got to my place, we had a few more drinks. Then she started talking about her jewelry. This is where it gets weird. She told me her jewelry was her big secret and it defined her. When I asked her why it was so important, she said, "I'm actually Anastasia, and I was never killed in Russia. My jewelry is my link to my past." It was hard for me to take that serious at this point with how much I drank, so I kind of challenged that statement, using the little bit I knew about history. At this point, she freaked out and started yelling at the top of her lungs about how I didn't respect ancestors and history. Then she got quiet and tiptoed right up to me and grabbed me by my neck. She then brought my face eye to eye with hers while still holding my neck. She says at this point, "I am a shaman and I will curse you." My ancestors have destroyed many people, and you do not respect that. You are from oppressive ancestors, and they will be punished. Then she put her hand in a whiskey glass and made a cross on my face and kissed my forehead. At this point, I started to sober up a little. I talked her into calming down, telling her I was only joking. Then she slowly started getting back to normal. Then she started talking about her cat fetish. She tells me she has a list of people who she tames to act as cats. I am not about judging people on their fetishes, so I listen in. She then tells me all the things she does to them and starts acting like a cat in my living room. If she had not yelled at me earlier on, I might have almost been turned on by it. My red flags in my head were tingling like crazy at this point, so I just listened and tried not to set her off. She noticed sage on my kitchen counter and asked me to let her light it and bless the house. Side note, I use sage to make my house smell better occasionally. It's kind of a ritual I like to do, but it's mine and my own. Something I take very personally and like to do myself. I tell her no, she can't light it, and that it's my thing to do on my own. Then she freaks out, telling me I'm a horrible human being and screaming all over the place. I tell her I can take her home now, and she runs to the door and goes outside. As I get outside, she is screaming at the top of her lungs that I am a horrible person and that I should go die. I tell her she can walk herself home then, and I go back to my place and lock the door. She then starts banging on the door hard in about 10 minutes, saying she left her phone in there. I grab her phone off the kitchen counter and open the door to hand it to her. She tries to barge inside and I block her with my forearm. She then acts like she is about to punch me. I just hold my ground and tell her she is not coming in. She screams she wanted the whiskey bottle we were drinking from. I told her hell no, because I paid for the damn thing. I slam the door at that point and lock it. I hear her bang on the door for a minute. I then hear her footsteps going down the stairs. I waited about an hour and then went walking outside to see if she was still hanging around. I didn't see her, nor did I ever see her again after that. I know this is probably not the scariest encounter ever, but for the next few nights, I was creeped out, always walking around the area I live in to make sure she wasn't hanging around. I honestly hope she is okay wherever she is, but I hope to never see her again. I managed to block out a lot of memories surrounding this night, but early this year I was mugged and my PTSD returned, as did a lot of the missing memories of those 12 hours. This is my first time I'm telling anyone the full story of what happened to me. I haven't told my partner, my therapist, my parents. No one knows these details. If there is anything that should be taken away from this story, it is this. Remember that you don't need to be polite to everyone you meet. The setting. In October 2018, I was 18. In my first year at university in a big city in the UK. I had always lived in the countryside before this, so I was never very street smart. About a year ago, before I went to uni, I had started a relationship with this guy, Jimmy, who's now my ex. It was my first real relationship, and I thought the world of him. But it was not reciprocated in a loving and compassionate way. Jimmy started off as very emotionally abusive and got progressively worse, but that's a whole other story. At this point, Jimmy and I had been together just under a year and had applied to universities in the same city, mostly by coincidence, and both moved to the same city. I wanted to have a proper student life, so got accommodation in a student living block on the other side of the city to him. Jimmy had been using drugs for quite a while, initially starting off just smoking weed, but this progressed rapidly, and by the time we were at uni, he was regularly doing a lot of hard drugs, plus smoking weed multiple times a day. Honestly, I don't think he was ever not high. When we moved to university, we still saw each other every couple days, and he found a regular drug dealer, Mark, that he had been using continually since we were there in September. Jimmy used to buy for Mark multiple times a week, so on a handful of occasions I had briefly met him. Mark lived a lot closer to my student accommodation than to Jimmy's, so a couple of weeks before this all happened, Jimmy had started picking up drugs from Mark when he came to see me, meaning Mark would often be outside of my accommodation. Jimmy had asked me a few times if I would pick up the drugs he bought from Mark, but I had always felt weird speaking to Mark on my own. Plus, I rarely smoked weed, so felt very weird picking up drugs in general. 6 p.m. One day at the end of October, Jimmy had plans to come and see me that evening and asked me again if I would pick up some weed from Mark. I was in a good mood that day and feeling more confident than usual, so for the first time I agreed to. Jimmy gave me Mark's number and said that Mark would message me when he was on his way. Only around 10 minutes later, I got a message from Mark saying that he was nearly outside my apartment and I needed to go outside, so I did. Outside of my accommodation, there was a quieter area with a lot of benches, so I sat and waited for him. Behind me was only a wall and a small contained area that had all of the bins for the building. Out of nowhere, I felt someone's hands on my shoulder in a really weird, creepy way. I jumped, obviously, and realized it was Mark, who I barely recognized as I had only briefly seen him a couple of times. I realized now that my back had been to the wall in the bin storage, so he must have been waiting there. I was immediately on guard because of how he touched my shoulders, especially because I didn't know him, so shifted away from him as he sat down next to me. He began talking to me as if we were buddies, asking me 1,000,001 questions about myself, like deeply personal questions. The whole time I was deflecting, not wanting to give out any information. So I started asking him questions instead. He began a really deep monologue about himself and his life, where he openly told me he had just gotten out of prison a few months before. It was for armed something, some kind of violent crime. I engaged his ramblings, just nodding along, but still trying to get back to the whole point of just picking up drugs for my boyfriend. 7 p.m. I have always been able to talk to anyone, and was always taught to be nice when someone is talking, so I ended up sitting there for around an hour, trying to get the conversation back to the reason I was there. Pick up drugs for my boyfriend and go. It was so long it actually started getting dark. This guy just kept talking. I knew my boyfriend was going to be coming over soon, so I kept looking at my phone to see if he was on his way, but he hadn't replied. Eventually, I told Mark that I needed to get back inside as I was meeting up with my boyfriend soon, and then going clubbing after with some friends, so I needed to get ready. And could I please just pick up the drugs? He then said, "Oh, Well, I can't give them to you here. There is CCTV everywhere. We can go inside so that I can give them to you. I had witnessed him giving my boyfriend drugs in the same spot countless times before, so I knew this was bullshit. I didn't want Mark to come back to my apartment, so I told him that he could go into the lobby of my building where there was a disabled bathroom, and he could give them to me there. He agreed and followed me inside. We went into the bathroom. It was a very large room, so I didn't have to be too close to him, and he locked the door behind us. He then began fiddling with something in his pocket. I assumed it was the drugs, but instead pulled down his trousers fully and started peeing in the toilet. I was hugely freaked out. This guy just presented his dick to me and began peeing, but I rationalized that there was no way he had any sexual motive because he had met me and my boyfriend together, so he knew I was in a relationship. I figured he just really needed to pee. I kept my eyes shut the whole time, and when he flushed, I thought that finally he would give me the drugs that I was there to collect. This whole thing had been going on for about an hour and a half by this point. He said, "I really want to roll myself a joint, but there's no space in here to do it. Can I come and roll it on your desk and then I'll give you Jimmy's stuff?" I asked again if he could just give it to me now, and he said no, saying that I was being rude for not inviting him in. By this point, I was wanting to get ready to go out with my friends later that evening and knew my boyfriend would be coming by any minute. So I figured it'd be okay even though I didn't want this. It's worth noting that I was emotionally abused by my boyfriend and knew he would be mad at me if I didn't collect his drugs, or if I annoyed Mark because he was his favorite dealer. I honestly figured that Mark was harmless, despite him telling me he was a violent criminal. F my life. And just assured myself that he was only a bit creepy. It would be fine. 8 p.m. Reluctantly, I took Mark up to my apartment, opened the door, and let him in. I said he had to roll his joint fast because I had to get ready. Finally, he gave me the drugs that my boyfriend wanted, so I felt better at that point. He walked over to my desk, moved all the things to the side, and sat down, getting out the things to roll his joint. I cannot roll a joint, but I've seen Jimmy do it countless times, so no, it doesn't take more than a minute or so. Mark keeps talking to me, but at this point my answers are getting shorter and shorter. He rolls this joint so slowly I can't even describe it. He then said, "Well, I can't smoke this outside, so is it cool if I just stay here and smoke it? It'll only take 5 minutes to smoke." I said no and told him again that I had to get ready. He said, "It's okay. You can get ready with me here." By this point, I was over it. I messaged my boyfriend again to tell him to hurry up. Mark asked me again, and in my frustration and wanting this guy to my apartment, I just said, "Okay, sure, but be quick." I then went out of my room into the shared kitchen. I only had 2 flatmates and no one else was in the apartment that night. I grabbed some wine in a glass so that I could have some celerity pre-drinks and returned to my room. I sat for another 15 minutes being increasingly less polite, but he kept talking to me. I drank my first glass of wine pretty fast and just decided if Mark was going to take ages, then I would just get ready to go out with my friends. I told him as soon as he finished smoking, he could just leave on his own. So I left him at my desk, took some clothes into the bathroom, and jumped into the shower. 9 p.m. Maybe a minute or so into my shower, I heard some soft footsteps outside the door, and like a scene from a freaking horror movie, I saw the door handle slowly be pushed down. Then, shit, I remembered to lock the door. All of a sudden, Mark began banging on the door. I turned the shower off and said, hi? Through the door. He shouted through the door, asking me to let him in because he needed to pee again. I obviously said no and just got dried and dressed. Thankfully, I took clothes to the bathroom as fast as I could. By this point, I figured there was no way he was going to leave my apartment until I did. So I did my makeup as fast as I physically could and messaged my friends that I'd be coming to theirs sooner than I had planned. I still hadn't gotten a reply from my boyfriend, so I just told him that I was going out early and not to come over. I got ready to go and told Mark that I was leaving now, and he needed to come downstairs with me. He was still sat at my desk and ignored what I was saying. He asked if he could stay in my room while I was out because he was tired and wanted a nap. Finally, I was firm with him, and after a lot of convincing, he left with me. I made sure to order an Uber to my friend's place so that he couldn't try and walk with me. And by the time we got outside, my Uber was nearly there. He stood with me, looking over my shoulder at my phone the whole time. Then the Uber arrived. I got into it and Mark straight up walked around the other side and got in. I was in disbelief and laughed. Then told the Uber driver that I didn't know who this guy was and that he wasn't getting in with me. The Uber driver was not as polite as me and told Mark to get out, and he did. 10 p.m. I sat there on the way to my friend's house and felt calm that I had gotten away from Mark. I called my friend from the Uber and told her what happened, so she said she would come outside of her building to get me with a group of her flatmates. My friend's accommodation was not far from mine. It took longer to get to by car than on foot because of the one-way system in the city. But I didn't care at this point. Maybe 10 to 15 minutes later I arrived, and my friend came over to my Uber, then brought me back to her group of friends. She had quite a few people with her, and I suddenly noticed that one of her male flatmates was talking to someone slightly away from the group. I look over and suddenly realized he was talking to Mark. I guess he was looking at the address when I had the Uber app open earlier. I whispered to my friend and she freaked out and went inside with me straight away. I was super freaked out that this guy wouldn't just leave me alone. He refused to leave my side for the last few hours, and now he had followed me to my friend's house. Honestly, I felt much safer now. I met a few creeps in my time, so just decided to get over it by having a nice time with my friend. So we sat in her kitchen, having a chat and some drinks. 11 p.m. After a while talking to her, I almost forgot what had happened just an hour ago and was getting increasingly tipsy from the wine. The kitchen door opened and her male flatmate comes inside announcing that he invited a guy in who had given him free weed. You guessed it, Mark walked in. Mark addressed me by name and walked over, putting his hands around my waist from behind. I get pretty confident when I drink, so had no problem pushing him off me and announcing to everyone in a joking way, "Yeah, this is the guy who has been following me around all evening. I don't know him." Even in this room with all of my friends' flatmates, I still didn't feel safe. He stayed away from me, looking at me for a while from the other side of the kitchen, and I just ignored him. My friend can tell I was uncomfortable, so suggested we go and drink in her room. Around 30 minutes after going into her room, the door slams open suddenly and Mark is standing there. He says, "Oh, I was looking for the bathroom. Can I use yours?" My friend headed en suite. She tells him to get the F out and he does. I'm honestly just bored of this guy's constant presence at this point, so we decide to just go to the club early. 12 p.m. We grab our stuff, run past the kitchen door and outside. My friend orders us an Uber and we get in and go to the club. After a while, some of her flatmates join us, but Mark does not. Thank you, God. The people who had been in the kitchen said that Mark left shortly after he saw me and my friend leave, but there was no sign of him now. I just try and enjoy the night, but being a poor student, I can't afford any more drinks at the club. As I began to sober up, I realized how shaken up and creeped out the whole evening made me, and I don't feel safe. 2 a.m. After only a couple of hours, I decide that I just want to go home and sleep because this whole experience freaked me out. I take an Uber back, use my key card to get into my apartment building, go upstairs and into my apartment. I started getting ready for bed, put on some PJs and started taking off my makeup. All of a sudden, I heard a loud knock on my door. I had no clue who it was, and since it was still early-ish for a Friday night, I thought my boyfriend maybe finally decided to show up. My door didn't have a peephole, so I walked to the door in my PJs, unlocked it, planning to open it a tiny bit to see who it was, and then bam! The door flew open so fast that I was pushed backwards into my apartment, and then shoved into my room, which was directly across from the front door. In my panic, I froze, then looked up only to realize that Mark was now standing in my apartment. The realization started to sink in. Mark had just forced his way into my room, and I was trapped here with him. He was visibly angry and very high. He locked the door behind him and began rambling about how I was so rude for not inviting him in with my friends, for ignoring him, for not letting him in the Uber, etc. I was terrified, so I ran over to my bed and grabbed my phone. He walked over behind me and began grabbing me, touching me as much as he could, so I shouted at him to get off. He saw my phone in my hand and immediately smiled and told me to open the camera. I was terrified, so I did as he said, and he said he wanted a picture of us together. I did as I was told and took a selfie with him while he posed with his arms around me and then kissing my cheek and my neck. He then screamed at me to unlock my phone, so I did. He made me open up my messages and send Jimmy the selfie of me and Mark sat next to each other on my bed, so I did. He waited for it to send and then grabbed my phone and put it down on the desk. He sat at my desk for the next 4 to 5 hours, talking at me continually, saying how I was so rude. I needed someone to teach me some manners, how I had to do what he said because he was older than me, how Jimmy wasn't good enough for me, how I was so beautiful and how he knew that I needed to be with him. He told me that his girlfriend knew he had been at my house that evening, and now she said he can't come home and it was my fault. The whole time I continued bargaining with him, trying to get him to leave, but it didn't work. Occasionally, I would just lie down on my bed or sit and not speak. Each time I did, he would get up and wrap his arms around me or try and spoon me, stroking my face, trying to kiss me and trying to take my clothes off and touch me. Every time I fought him off, and he would get angry again and go and sit at the desk and keep shouting. I knew that this guy has previously been in prison for some kind of violent crime, so I did not want to piss him off. I just sat there for hours and quietly sobbed, too scared of trying to leave because I would have had to walk past him to get to the door. I was out of options. I didn't know if I could get out without angering him. I couldn't call the police because he had my phone. My flatmates weren't in, so my screams meant nothing. 6 a.m. While he sat at my desk, he kept smoking more weed or taking a line of whatever drug, so he was becoming more and more out of it. He was becoming more sleepy as he smoked more weed, until I was able to speak between his ramblings. So I gently said I was going to the bathroom. I noticed he had eyes partially closed and figured I only had one chance, so I took the opportunity and grabbed my phone off the desk as fast as I could, unlocked the door, and ran out the apartment. The one thing I will always remember is being in tears. Pressing the button for the elevator to come probably about 50 times because I was so scared that he was going to come after me. As I got into the elevator, I heard him come out of my apartment, shouting my name, but the elevator doors closed as he looked at me. I was able to get downstairs and out the building. I ran around the corner of the building in my PJs and maniacally dialed the number for the police. Told them what happened and that this guy had been in prison until recently. And next thing I knew, around 5 police cars showed up. I was in such a state and called my boyfriend to tell him what happened. He was still awake and hadn't come to visit the night before because he was with a girl who is a friend, and said that now he didn't want to come to be with me because he had some weed on him and didn't want to be near the police. I told him to get to my place right now, and he reluctantly did. The aftermath. The police had to force entry to my apartment because Mark had locked himself in and barricaded the door. They arrested him and he ended up going to prison for drug charges, but not for what he did or tried to do to me. The police said they couldn't prosecute him because I had willingly let him into my apartment earlier in the night, and he hadn't physically done anything. Sexual assault and attempted R-word, plus holding me hostage in my own apartment, but okay. After I'd given my statements to the police, I went back inside to see that after I had escaped my room, it was trashed. Mark had thrown things around and smashed things in anger. I'm so glad I got out when I did because I can't imagine what would have happened if I was trapped in the crossfire. I don't know what happened to Mark after that, but I moved out of that apartment a couple months later and away from that city as soon as I could when COVID hit, to make sure Mark could never find me. I actually stayed in my abusive relationship for another year or so until I realized that I was too good to put up with Jimmy's shit any longer. I had such severe PTSD from the incident that I couldn't go outside for months after, which messed up the whole of my first year at university. It has taken until now for me to be able to walk around at night, and being alone in public is still really difficult. I'm very aware that the ending is very anticlimactic, and I wish I had been able to advocate for myself, but I just shut down emotionally afterwards. I can't get too much into the details of the sexual assault and attempted R-word, because honestly thinking about it makes me want to throw up. But I realized I was so lucky to be able to fight him off every time. Because without a doubt, he wanted to hurt me. After this all happened, I started volunteering with people in prison for crimes like sexual assault to try and prevent them from ever reoffending. I think it is my way of advocating for others because I couldn't advocate for myself. If you take one thing away from this, stop being so polite. I was raised to be nice to everyone, and I realize now that being polite worsened everything. I wish I had never been polite enough to pick up drugs for my ex, or polite enough to get Mark into my building when he begged. So to Mark, F you, and please, let's not ever meet again. In my late teens and early 20s, I was friends with a girl named Lucy. She was a very lonely kind of girl whose parents were, well, honestly, really shitty parents. Her mother was verbally abusive, and her father really couldn't care less about anything. Because of the lack of love in her life, Lucy searched through dating sites for love and comfort from strange men, and was not afraid of meeting them face to face, even if they'd been chatting for only a few days. My friendship with Lucy was a strange one. I found her quite annoying sometimes, but I also felt awful for her because of her loneliness and lack of friends and love in her life. Sometimes, I really didn't want to hang out with her, and some days I would accept her offer to hang out. When it was just her and I together, she was normally okay to be around, but also very appreciative of having someone giving her attention. We had a small group of friends, and she would try to get all of us together as often as possible, and honestly, the whole group together was really quite fun. When we were all together, Lucy was very happy, and you could just tell that she was happy to be around people who didn't insult her as her mother does. Suddenly, Lucy tells us she has a boyfriend. We were all surprised because she knew she met a lot of guys online, but we had never heard her say she was dating someone. A few days later, she sets up a day for our friend group to meet Trevor. None of us were looking forward to it because we thought he was going to be like all of the others, a temporary boy toy. When we met him, we all felt awkward. He barely spoke a word. He wouldn't look directly at any of us at all. Lucy would try to be funny, but he would just give her dirty looks. Needless to say, we thought he was a weird one and could tell he didn't care much for her. As the days went on, Lucy kept telling me how much Trevor did not like me. This was weird because no one ever disliked me. I am always polite, respectful, and I smile a lot at everyone. But for some reason, he did not like me. She kept saying he thinks I'm using Lucy for her money. Not sure how he thought that since I paid for everything for Lucy. To keep this piece of the story short, I think he was trying to find reasons to convince her to get rid of me. I got a terrible vibe from Trevor. He dressed like he didn't care about life. He never smiled. He hadn't shaked our hands when first meeting us. He stank of weed and really had an overall uncomfortable feeling about him. After months of Trevor trying to convince Lucy that I am a terrible friend and she should not hang out with me anymore, she started to do as he said. She would start to hide me from him. If she and I were together and he would call her on her phone, She would lie and say I wasn't there. If she was with a group of friends, he would have her swear I wasn't there. When he was going to be joining the group on an outing or just hanging out at her place, she would tell me I couldn't come. Lucy will do whatever a boyfriend says just to keep pleasing him so she doesn't lose them. Now here's where it gets scary. Lucy calls me one day and says she wants me to hang out at her place, so I agreed. She came to pick me up. We went to her house and watched TV for a bit. We then decided, since it's a nice day outside, we would take her two dogs for a walk to a nearby pocket park and would later return to the house to have lunch together. While at this park, she receives a phone call. Now, let me say that Lucy is not a private person whatsoever and has never ever walked away to answer a phone call until this day. She walked far enough away that she knew I would not be able to hear anything she said. This was suspicious to me, but not enough to question it. The call ends and she begins walking towards me with a look on her face as if she is trying not to smile. She tells me, "So I need to bring you home now." I was slightly confused as we had only been together for about an hour, when we usually spend the entire day together, and she would never want me to go home. She would even frequently beg me to sleep over to avoid being alone. So anyway, I said okay, and we walked to drop off her dogs at home, and we got into her car and off we went. About 10 minutes into the car ride, I realized she isn't going in the direction of my house, so I questioned it. Where are we going?" She smirked but didn't respond. I asked again, laughing uncomfortably. Seriously, where are we going?" She continued to smirk but didn't want to answer me. I started to realize she was heading in the direction of where her boyfriend lived. Oh, hell no. I asked one last time with anger in my voice, "Where are you taking me?" Her only response was bone-chilling to me. "Trevor wants to talk to you." Nope, nope, nope. I wasn't having any of this. I insisted and demanded she let me out of the car, but with her evil smirk and same response, she said it again. "It's okay. He just wants to talk to you." I was furious at this point because this creepy guy who looks like he wants to kill someone, who also despised me, wanted to talk to me. Why can't he talk to me on the phone? Why do I need to go to his sketchy apartment? She absolutely refused to let me out of the car. She had the doors locked, as if I wasn't able to unlock my passenger door. I waited until she reached a red light. I grabbed her wallet from the back seat and took out her bus pass and bolted out the door. I had no idea where I was or where the nearest bus stop was, but I was not about to let her crazy-ass boyfriend do whatever he wanted to me. She yelled for me to get back into the car, but of course I ignored her. She sped off furiously. I immediately blocked her number on my phone. I removed her as my friend on social media and immediately warned the group of friends not to talk to her because she has gone nuts. I have not spoken to her since that very day, and she also lost the other 5 friends of the group as well. After this situation, Lucy, I hope you're truly lonely now. Many, many years ago, before kids, rescue animals, a mortgage, and a husband. I was a travel writer in Europe. I did most of my trips alone. This story is about the first time I visited Prague. I'd never been to Prague, and the trip was last minute, so I had little time to prepare. My travel partner had dumped me in another country, and I was determined to make the best out of my trip by visiting a place I'd never been. Upon arrival at the train station, I visited the accommodation office and asked for a hostel not far from the center. In my early 20s, winging it was part of the fun. These days, I'm far less adventurous. The hostel they sent me to was a sprawling, crumbling, slate gray Art Deco building on an nondescript street about a 10-minute walk to Stare Mesto. The inside was probably beautiful at one time, but by the time I checked in, it was full of shabby, mismatched furniture and cheap stained carpet. Most of the light fixtures were broken, leaving everything but the lobby dark and gloomy. It smelled of standing water and dust. I found my room, a double for $12 a night, and made note of the fact that I had a roommate. She wasn't there, but on her side of the room there was a suitcase, dressed neatly folded across the back of a plastic chair, a scattering of makeup containers on the beat-up desk, and a stack of German fashion magazines on the bed. As I had no plans or goals on this impromptu trip, so I spent the afternoon exploring Old Town Square and the Jewish Quarter, and Wenceslas Square. I purchased some Czech crystal for my mom and painted eggs from a street vendor for myself. I also made reservations for a sunset dinner cruise for one. At around 6 p.m., I returned to my room to shower, change clothes, and unload my purchases. When I left my room about an hour later, there was no indication that my roommate had returned at any point during the day. After the cruise, I stopped at a tiny bar on Tinska and had a glass of wine. I'd heard horror stories about the dangers of Prague, but I felt no more trepidation than I did in any other large city. Sure, the cobblestone streets, fog rolling off the Vltava, backlit Gothic architecture, and winding alleys made me think of Jack the Ripper and Dracula, but in a good way. It was nearly midnight when I returned to my hostel, so I was surprised to find that my roommate still hadn't returned. That wasn't uncommon, though. Backpackers are a fickle lot. She could have gone on a short overnight trip and just left her stuff behind, hooked up with a guy or girl, and was holed up at their place or hanging out at another hostel. So I was surprised but not concerned. I took another shower before bed, however, and was surprised to find that things in the room had changed up in my return. Her bed was neatly turned down. The magazines had moved to the nightstand and the dress was gone. The strangest things, though, was the addition of a pink silky nightgown spread across the bed. My bed. Maybe she thought she still had the room to herself. I didn't see how. My shopping bags, clothes, and toiletries were in plain view. I gently moved the nightgown over to her bed and then settled in for the night as I wrote in my journal. I assumed she was in the shower or somewhere nearby, so I expected her return shortly. After about an hour, though, her side was still empty. I needed to use the restroom before I went to sleep, so I made one last trip down the hall. The building was unusually quiet. There weren't the regular crowds of chatty backpackers, the clinking of glasses, or music that would normally leak through the walls. There was nothing. It was hushed, like a church after the congregation has left. I found myself practically tiptoeing back. My room was near the end of the hall, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the corridor was darker than before. The few working lights were blinking as they struggled to stay lit, and it reminded me of a funhouse. A tightness began to fill my stomach, and I subconsciously quickened my steps. There wasn't a soul behind me, yet I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced I'd see someone gaining momentum on me. The only sound was the soft thud of my flip-flops as they struck my soles. I was flooded with relief as I flung open my door, but it didn't last long. Everything was exactly as I had left it, except for the silky nightgown which was now back on my bed. Sleep came in fits and starts. I left the lamp on for a while, still convinced my roommate would be right back, but the shadows it cast made the room even spookier. It was too dark with the light off. I'd finally slipped into a deep sleep when I suddenly heard the door open. A man stood in the darkened doorway, the hall light behind him showing just enough for me to see his contorted face. "I didn't mean to," he sobbed. "You have to help me." Too confused and disoriented to be scared, I sat up, scrubbed my eyes, and reached for the lamp switch. But once the room was light, I saw that the door was closed. There was no man. I quickly bounded off the bed and went for the door. It was locked. Nobody could have entered without a key, and the hallway? It was empty. I passed the rest of the night fully clothed, sitting up in bed and with the light on. Though I'd paid for 2 more nights, at 7 a.m. I gathered all my stuff and went down to the reception desk to check out. "By the way," I said to the 20-something receptionist, "my roommate never returned. I'm a little concerned." She picked up the room key, looked at it hard, frowned, and then glanced at her computer. "What room were you in again?" When I repeated to her, she looked back at her screen. "Ma'am, that room's been empty for 3 weeks, and it's been clean since then. We only have 6 people in the whole building." The hostel has since been renovated and is now a luxury hotel. Side note, I realized that we didn't physically meet, but I thought it relevant since I seemed to have met someone. Someone entered and left my room. And that, dear listeners, is the end of these true Let's Not Meet stories. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you kindly. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection of stories. Until next time, I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good